The information pertaining to Pokemon is nearly infinite. With 30 years of games, anime, cards, and millions of fans, the Pokemon franchise has a lot of lore. This iceberg aims to cover a lot of it, from basic stuff like Missing No and IVs, to more obscure and bizarre stuff like the Godstone, the original plot of X and Y, and a lot of fan theories. Obviously, not everything from the history of Pokemon is going to be in this iceberg, because then this video would be at least 50 hours long. But I think I got a good mix of lore, obscure information, and urban legends, so hopefully you can come out the other side with some new information to chew on. Now, let's get into it. Level 1 is supposed to represent the most well-known facts and theories, so we're starting with one of the oldest and most beloved playground rumors: Mew is under the truck. This is basically a really old rumor that you could find Mew under the truck in the SSN transition screen. See, it's not normally possible to get to this point in the map at all, because Surf is locked behind Cut, which is only obtainable by clearing the SSN, which causes it to depart and closes off the area forever. But if you trade a Pokemon with Cut into the game, you don't need to clear the SSN to get the HM, meaning you can come back to this area later where you can surf and find this truck. This truck is the only truck in the entire game, and was the only truck in any kind of Pokemon game until like Gen 5. That alone made it kind of weird and cool, but the fact you can't get here without a bit of a sequence break only made it weirder and cooler. Rumors circulated from there, with Mew hiding under the truck being the one that stuck the most. Unfortunately, this is nothing more than a rumor, and there is no way to move the truck or obtain Mew in general without some extensive glitches or limited time events. Interestingly, this truck does appear in Fire Red and Leaf Green. It still doesn't have Mew under it, but in those games you can find a lava cookie over here, which obviously isn't as cool as Mew, but it's still cool they put something here regardless. Next is EVs and IVs. These are basically hidden growth modifiers that have existed in the game since Generation 3, but are very rarely acknowledged by the games themselves. They basically play a part in determining how much of a stat a Pokemon gets via growth. EVs, or effort values, are awarded based on the Pokemon a Pokemon defeats, with every single Pokemon awarding a certain number of IVs for specific stats. For example, Magikarp awards 1 Speed EV, and Gardevoir awards 3 Special Attack EVs. EVs can also be obtained through other methods like vitamins, such as Carbos or Protein, which award 10 EVs for a given stat. Other methods of EV training have been introduced and deintroduced over the years as well, like Super Training, the Power Items, and Feathers. Every 4 EVs a Pokemon has in a stat equates to 1 additional point in that stat. So if you knock out 20 Magikarps with a Breloom, Breloom will gain 5 points to its speed stat in addition to regular growth. Each stat can have up to 252 EVs in it, and a Pokemon can have a total of 510 EVs trained into it. However, in the recent release of Pokemon Champions, this whole system was kind of disregarded in exchange for a much simpler points-based system, which is admittedly much easier to understand. But we don't know if this change will be brought to future Pokemon games as well, or if it's just for Champions. IVs, on the other hand, have been completely removed from Champions, but I still think they're worth covering. IVs stand for individual values, and were originally a huge part of what made Pokemon unique. Basically, a value between 0 and 31 is randomly assigned for each of the 6 stats, with higher IVs equating to higher stats. I believe the exact number is 1 additional stat point for every 2 IVs at level 100, which is fairly significant. What makes IVs interesting is that they were actually really hard to manipulate and control for a lot of Pokemon's history. Up until Gen 7, the only ways to get better IVs was through catching Pokemon with better IVs or breeding and hoping the IVs passed down, which made it really tedious to get Pokemon with perfect IVs. Since then, bottle caps have been introduced, which allow you to max out the IVs of a given stat, unless you're using a golden bottle cap, which will max them all out. I know covering EVs and IVs might seem a bit dumb to some of our more advanced Pokemon fans, but there's a good chance a lot of casuals won't know what they are, and we will need to have some understanding of them to understand some of the later entries in the Iceberg, so I think it's worth it to cover them. Next, we have banned anime episodes. This one is pretty self-explanatory. Over the course of the 30-ish year run of the Pokemon anime, a number of episodes have been banned for one reason or another, mostly because of Jinx. I'm not even kidding. A lot of people are probably already aware of the original Jinx incident, where episode 35 was banned because Jinx looks like it was doing blackface, portraying negative racial stereotypes of African Americans. But there were actually 3 more episodes featuring Jinx that were all banned for similar reasons: Street Fight and the Mandarin Island Mismatch from the Orange Island series, and the Ice Cave from the Johto series. But there's actually one more episode that was also banned for blackface, this time from the Sun and Moon series, because there is an episode where Ash puts on black face paint to try and look like a Passimian. There was also an episode that was banned because they gave James massive honkers, and one that was banned because of the prevalent use of handguns specifically aimed at children. But all of the episodes we've talked about thus far have actually only been banned outside of Asia. There's only one episode that has a worldwide ban since its airing, and that was episode 38 of the original series, Electric Soldier Porygon. This episode sent over 600 children to the hospital in Japan because of its intense flashing lights. I'm obviously not going to show this now, but the footage is out there if you really want to see it. Just be careful. Since this event, Porygon has not been featured in a single episode of the Pokemon anime, nor have its evolutions Porygon 2 or Porygon Z in any meaningful way, which is really unfortunate because they are a cool evolution line. Next we have the fire starters represent the Chinese zodiacs. This is more of an interesting observation that used to hold some pretty solid ground. Basically all the fire starters match up with one of the 12 Chinese zodiacs that represent the years. The Charmander line is the dragon, the Cyndaquil line is the rat, the Torchic line is the rooster, and so on and so on. Even the most recent starter, Pombon, fits this pattern since it represents a dog. But then there's Fuecoco, which doesn't fit at all, and now that Pombom exists, we have 2 representations of the dogs, since Fennekin was thought to be the representation before. So it seems like this pattern is pretty much debunked at this point, which is unfortunate because I always thought it was pretty cool. And lastly, for tier 1, we have Ash wished to stay young. This is a really common fan theory that the reason Ash was able to stay 10 for so long was because he made a wish to Ho-Oh to stay young forever at the end of the first episode. There are a bunch of theories that surround Ash and his eternal youth, from him being dead the whole time to him being in a coma the whole time to him just getting plastic surgery every season. But we're not going to be covering those in this iceberg because I feel like they're well known enough that they'd be even above level 1, you know? Plus a lot of them are pretty similar or derivative, so consider this to be your placeholder for every Ash Young entry. In level 2, we're going to cover mostly well-known Pokemon stuff, but some of it is going to be more complicated or a bit darker. Starting with potentially the most famous glitch in all of Pokemon, if not all of gaming, Missing No. Missing No is a glitched Pokemon that can be caught in the original Gen 1 games. It is a bird normal type or normal 999 type and is caught well above level 100. The glitch to get Missing No is actually super simple to pull off. All you have to do is talk to the old drunkard in Viridian, fly to Cinnabar Island, and surf along this coast. That's it. But the specifics of how this works are more complicated. Basically, every route in the game has Pokemon that are stored in an encounter table as bytes that will determine which Pokemon you can encounter. When we talk to the old man, our name is temporarily placed in this storage location. And because Viridian City and Cinnabar Island don't have encounter tables of their own, when we surf along this route, our name is used to draw from the encounter table instead, which can lead to the game drawing Pokemon from invalid locations, which causes Missing No. It's a bit more complicated than that, so if you want to know more, I've put a link to a video that goes more in depth in the description down below. Gengar is Clefairy's shadow is a pretty fun one. It's just a theory that Gengar is Clefairy's shadow, which comes about from the visual similarities between the two. Both do have similar body shapes and both were introduced in Gen 1. At the time, Clefairy was a normal type, meaning that the duo were immune to each other's attacks, which further deepened the connection. Even now, there's still some connection because Gengar's poison type is super effective against Clefairy. There's not much else to it, it's just a cool little coincidence. The cup Professor Oak battle is another piece of Gen 1 history. As the name suggests, there was a fight you were supposed to be able to do against Professor Oak in what appears to be a post-game super boss battle. He has 5 Pokemon, all ranging from level 66 to 70, making him an even higher level than the champion. Obviously, this battle was cut from the final game for whatever reason. Maybe they ran out of time, and maybe they thought it would undermine the rival battle as the final battle, or maybe they thought it would taint the image of Professor Oak. Whatever the reason, it's such a shame that this battle was cut from the game and that we cannot access it anymore. Except we can. By using the long-range trainer glitch, which is way too complicated to explain in this video, we can force the battle to appear as if it is a wild encounter. Obviously, it doesn't have any flair and it does feel quite unfinished, but it's still cool that the battle can be fought in-game without hacking or anything. Pokerus. Starting in Gen 2, Pokemon trainers started reporting a bizarre new phenomena. After bringing a Pokemon to a Pokemon Center, Nurse Joy would rarely point out that their Pokemon had a condition called Pokerus. This condition was extremely rare and wasn't harmful at all. Instead, it seemed to make the Pokemon grow faster. Not much else is known about the condition, but for whatever reason, it never appeared in the Paldea region. In reality, Pokerus is a really rare mechanic that causes Pokemon to gain EVs at double the rate they normally would while infected. There's a 1 in 21,000 chance that a Pokemon will get infected after a battle ends, and once it is, it can spread the condition to other Pokemon for up to 4 days. The curing process can also take up to 4 days, and once a Pokemon is cured, it cannot get the condition ever again. For whatever reason, Pokerus was not included in the Paldea games. While we're on the topic of rare Pokemon occurrences, we should also talk about rare shiny Pokemon, or rather, rarer shiny Pokemon, which are the Square Sparkle shiny Pokemon. In Galar only, there is a 1 in 16 chance that a shiny Pokemon you encounter will have square shiny sparkles instead of the regular ones. This makes the base odds of finding one of these shinies around 1 in 65,000, as if shinies weren't rare enough as is. As far as I can tell, Sword and Shield are the only games to have this feature, but it has led to some of the rarest potential Pokemon, like authentic shiny Square Sinistea, which requires a 1 in 100 chance to get an authentic Sinistea and the 1 in 65,000 chance to get the rare shiny symbol, meaning it's a 1 in 6.5 million chance at base. This can obviously be increased with the Shining Charm and other shiny hunting methods, but it's still super rare. Gary's Raticate died on the SS Anne. This is another really old fan theory. Did you ever notice how our rival stopped using Raticate after our battle on the SS Anne? Well, according to this theory, that's because it died. He couldn't get off the ship fast enough after our battle due to the commotion of the boarding passengers and the ship departing, so he couldn't get it to a Pokemon Center soon enough after it fainted. This is supposedly why we see him next at Pokemon Tower, as he's there to bury his Pokemon, and it's also why he stops using Raticate from that battle forward. Now, is it also possible that he just, decided to put a better Pokemon on his team instead? Yeah, but that's way less fun to think about. Let's make this children's game way more morbid than it has to be. And lastly, in level 2, we have Mystery Gift exclusive areas. This is an original entry that I'm adding to the Iceberg, because I think these areas are interesting and not many people get to see them. Do you remember the house in Canalave with the locked door that could never be opened? Where the white rock that felt important but never actually seemed to do anything? Well, these are 2 prominent examples of Mystery Gift exclusive areas, as you can only see the purposes of these places via a limited time mystery gift. As a child, I was fascinated by these, especially this door, because you couldn't get through it even with walk-through walls cheats. It wouldn't be until after Platinum released that I learned what they were for, and my mind was blown that they actually had a purpose. Nowadays, though, these sorts of areas have pretty much died out, as most event Pokemon are now just distributed directly via the internet. Although we did get that little side story for Petron and Scarlet and Violet, which was pretty cool. Now we're moving on to level 3, which is the first level below the waves, meaning there's going to be some decently obscure stuff here. It's nothing crazy, but this is the first level where you might hear about some theories or mechanics you didn't know about. But first up, we have a bit of a dark one: ghosts of people in Pokemon. For whatever reason, the Pokemon games are filled to the brim with ghosts. A number of games have these anomalies and rarely have explanations. The phenomena started in Gen 4 with the Old Chateau and continued all the way to Gen 8 with the dead girl who gives you the Reaper cloth. The most infamous of these, though, is probably the Kalos Ghost Girl that will glide past you and say, "No, you're not the one." Even after the release of Legends ZA, we still have no idea what she's talking about here, but apparently she's still haunting people, at least based on what this NPC says. There's a good chance you encountered at least one of these ghosts over your years of playing Pokemon, but there are just so many that it makes you wonder why. If you want a more in-depth look at these ghosts, I actually made a whole video on them a few months ago for Halloween, so I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. While you're down there though, maybe you should consider subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me if you did, and you should at least think about it if you're enjoying the video. Next is infinite Spinda variations. Did you know that almost every Spinda ever encountered has a unique pattern? There are over 4.2 billion unique Spinda variations that are determined by their personality values, meaning that no two Spinda you catch are likely to be the same. Sure, there's a chance they're the same, like there's nothing coded into the game to ensure they're not the same, but the odds are so incredibly small that you could encounter a Spinda every day for the rest of your life and still not get a repeat. Add to that the fact that every variation can be shiny, and you can probably see why I'm saying there are infinite amounts of Spinda, at least in the mainline games. In Pokemon Go, there are 9, which is just a bit less than 4.2 billion in case that wasn't obvious. Next is ROM hacks and fan games. I wasn't exactly sure where to put ROM hacks in this iceberg, but I knew I wanted to include them even before I started collecting the other entries. ROM hacks are basically Pokemon fan games, and if you like Pokemon to a high degree, you've probably dipped your toe into them before. They can range from games that alter the base game to increase difficulty to games that take place in completely new regions with brand new, fully fleshed out stories. A lot of love and effort goes into these projects, and I wanted to at least mention them in this iceberg because a lot of them mean a lot to me, and I think they're the perfect example of just how passionate Pokemon fans can be. Some of the most popular fan games include Pokemon Infinite Fusions, Radical Red, and Platinum Kaizo, but there are so many good ones out these days, it's actually insane. Our next two entries are about glitches, the first one being the coin case glitches from the Gen 2 games. Of all the glitches in Pokemon, I think coin case glitches are my personal favorite. They exist because of a translation bug, meaning they only exist in the English version of Gold and Silver. Basically, by listening to a Pokemon's cry and then immediately using the coin case, the game jumps to an improper section of RAM, causing a number of effects depending on the Pokemon's cry. These effects can range from simple stuff like changing the color of the game or making it crash, to spawning specific Pokemon, making Pokemon shiny, or giving Pokemon specific stats. These later ones require additional setup, which involves depositing certain Pokemon into boxes and naming them, which then alters the outcome of the arbitrary code execution. This means this glitch is one of the easiest ways to obtain a shiny Celebi. It's also just a really fun glitch to mess around with because it's so easy to pull off and can be done relatively early into the game. The other glitch we're going to talk about is the final huge glitch of the iceberg. It's the Pomegg Berry glitch. Like the coin case, this isn't just one glitch, but a class of glitches that relates to the Pomegg Berry in Pokemon Emerald, which was a newly introduced berry that reduced the number of HP EVs a Pokemon had by 10. I'm sure you can see where this is going. By using a Pomegg Berry on a Pokemon with 1 HP and at least 8 EVs in HP, we can force this Pokemon to have -1 HP, which displays as $35. This opens the door to a whole host of glitches, most of which are kind of useless, but it does allow for a sub-glitch called Glitzer Popping, which can be used to obtain normally hard to get Pokemon like Mew and Deoxys or the legendary beasts, which were really hard to get in Gen 3. You could also use it to spawn in items, allowing you to have infinite rare candies and Master Balls, or even get event exclusive items like the Eon Ticket or Aurora Ticket, giving you access to areas that are otherwise nearly impossible to go to without some sort of external cheats. It's another very cool and broken glitch that I personally don't have too much experience with, but is very well known among glitch-loving Pokemon fans. You know, after talking about all these glitches, I kinda wanna make an iceberg just for glitches. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Rotom was a legendary. This is a theory that Rotom was originally supposed to be a legendary Pokemon. The reasons are pretty simple. First of all, in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, it has the same music and entrance animation as Pokemon like Cresselia and Heatran, which are obviously legendary legendary Pokemon. Secondly, it was a one-of-a-kind Pokemon in those games as well, just like the other legendary Pokemon. And thirdly, at the time, it had a unique encounter method, since you encountered it by interacting with a TV. Now, obviously, these stats are not on par with a legendary Pokemon, but I kind of wonder if this was Game Freak experimenting with the concept of an early game legendary, you know? Obviously, since its introduction, Rotom has basically become a gimmick Pokemon that Game Freak shoves into literally every electronic device ever. And I definitely don't think it's a legendary anymore, but I can completely understand why people were under this impression when it was originally introduced. Giratina is Satan. This is another really well-known tidbit / theory. There are a lot of similarities between Giratina and Satan, both in their design and their lore. Both opposed their respective god at one point, and both basically got banished to hell because of their insubordination. Additionally, a lot of Giratina's body parts appear in sets of 6, with his altered form having 6 legs, 6 spikes on his wings, and 6 of these collared things. In his origin form, he has 6 wings, 6 of these collared things, and 6 spikes on his body, but this number has since been changed in the official art. I don't think there's actually a deep connection here, but it's still interesting to think about. And the final entry of level 3 is the Great Pokemon War. The Great Pokemon War is an event that supposedly happened in the recent history of the Kanto region. We don't know much about it though, as the only reference to this war comes from this line of dialogue from Lieutenant Surge. But people who believe in this theory point to other aspects of the Kanto region to back it up, such as its lack of middle-aged people, which suggests that a previous generation went to war and never came back. Another aspect is the fact that Johto and Kanto share a Pokemon League, which has led some fans to speculate that the war was a civil war between these two regions. Another popular theory was that the war was between Unova and Kanto because Lieutenant Surge is obviously inspired by a generic American soldier, so he might be an occupying force in the Kanto region from one of the American regions. None of this is confirmed though, and this specific war is never really brought up outside of this one line as we stated earlier. We do know of at least one war that has happened in the history of the Pokemon world, but that was waged in Kalos 3,000 years ago, so I highly doubt Lieutenant Surge served in that war, unless he also got hit by the immortalizing beam like AZ did. Moving on to level 4, you already know the drill. A little more obscure, a little darker, blah blah blah. The first entry isn't really either of those, though. It's the split timeline. The split timeline is just the fact that the Pokemon games we play take place in at least 2 timelines, one with Mega Evolution and one without it. Well, technically there might be infinite timelines because of Ultra Space and the way all those parallel universes work, but that's a discussion for another level. The Ore region is Arizona is another simple one that's down here just because not a lot of people have played the GameCube Pokemon games. The Ore region, where those games take place, is based on the state of Arizona, hence the desert and general depressing vibes. Personally, I always thought it was more Nevada-esque, especially with Realgam Tower, which is basically just Las Vegas, but Arizona also makes sense. Erica is a kimono girl is exactly what it sounds like. Based on the fact that she wears a kimono, some fans theorize that she is, or was, one of the kimono girls from Johto. She does also use grass types, which means she could use an evolution like the rest of the kimono girls in Leafeon. The original theory I found that suggests Erica is a kimono girl also suggests Cynthia and Flannery are, but I couldn't really find anything to back those up or even a visual resemblance for them. Latios and Latios made Togepi. This is another theory that claims that Latios and Latios were the original creators of the Togepi species. It's mostly spurred on from the similarities between the markings on the Togepi line and the markings on the chests of Latios and Latios. These markings are also red and blue, which are obviously the same colors as Latios and Latios. This theory kind of falls apart when you look at their shiny variations though, because Latios and Latios get new colors and the Togepi line doesn't. Hydreigon hates Ghetsis is less of a theory and more of just a sad but easy to miss fact. In Black and White 2, Ghetsis has Hydreigon use Frustration, which is basically the opposite of Return and does more damage the lower the Pokemon's happiness is. This alone would be enough proof that Ghetsis doesn't like Hydreigon, but there's more. Hydreigon Pokemon usually doesn't evolve until level 64, but we fight it at level 54, meaning he somehow forced the Pokemon to evolve early, which, as we know from the Johto games, is usually painful for the Pokemon. On top of that, Ghetsis has Hydreigon hold the Life Orb item, which trades 10% of its total HP for a boost in its attack, trading its life for power. So it really seems like Ghetsis just doesn't like this Pokemon, but to be honest, he might have a good reason for that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That entry isn't for a couple more levels. For now, we have to talk about Diamond Snow. Diamond Snow refers to a date-based event where the snow of specific areas will be replaced by this sparkly sort of effect. This event happens in a number of games, but is by far the most common in the original Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Most of the dates relate to important dates in the history of the Pokemon series, like the day Red and Green released, Junichi Masuda's birthday, or the release of Diamond and Pearl in North America. But there are some days that relate to real-world holidays, like February 29th, Leap Day, New Year's Eve, and Honensai. My personal favorite, though, is March 31st, which, according to Bulbapedia, has the event because that is the day that Mew was originally discovered. It's a cool little detail that's super easy to miss, especially since the effect is not that different in most games. Finally, for level 4, we have Munna was foreshadowed in Gen 1. Outside of Mount Moon, there is a trainer who describes a Pokemon they want to exist that didn't at the time, requesting a pink one with a floral pattern, which is pretty much a perfect match for Munna. This apparently wasn't the intention of the creation of Munna though, at least according to an interview with Ken Sugimori, but it's still a really neat coincidence at the very least. Moving into level 5, we're going to start covering a lot more theories now, like the Chateau poisoning theory. The old Chateau of Sinnoh is one of the most haunted locations in all of Pokemon, with 2 separate ghosts wandering its halls. But have you ever asked yourself why it's haunted? Well, some fans believe it is the result of a poisoning that was initiated by the butler but went awry, and the child was poisoned by accident. Most of this theory comes from the antidote that you can find in the garbage can in the kitchen of the chateau, which insinuates there was poison in the house at one point. Now, could they have had this antidote just in case of an emergency? Yeah, but a poisoning is so much more interesting. Event cartridges. This is just a fun little tidbit, but back in the day, in-person event distributions were done with unique unsold game cartridges that had the event Pokemon on them. These things were supposed to be destroyed once an event was over, but a number of them have been kept secretly, and now you can purchase them online for a lot of money. Ray and Akari are their own ancestors is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Basically, because Ray and Akari are from the modern era but were sent back a few hundred years, they could be their own ancestors if they decided to start a family and were from a modern-day Hisui. Considering they look exactly like Dawn and Lucas, I would say them being from Sinnoh is not unlikely, but there isn't really any evidence to back this theory up aside from how similar they look to Ray and Akari. Jirachi gave Rayquaza Mega Evolution is another pretty self-explanatory theory. Jirachi is known as the Pokemon that grants wishes when it wakes up once every 1,000 years. This lines up with the old habits of Groudon and Kyogre, who used to wake up and fight over primal energy once every 1,000 years, until Rayquaza Mega evolved to stop them. The theory goes that Jirachi was the one who gave Rayquaza the ability to Mega Evolve all those years ago, because Rayquaza so desperately wanted to stop the fighting. There isn't much evidence to back this up though, and I think it only arose because the timelines kind of line up. That or Jirachi's one and only fan wanted to make it seem more important than it actually is. The original plot of the 3rd Pokemon movie. Before the movie we got with Entei and the Unknown, director Takeshi Shudo had a completely different idea for a movie. He wanted to create a movie that would explore how the world came to be inhabited with Pokemon, while exploring what happened to the animals we know in the real world. It was supposed to start with the discovery of a T-Rex fossil in the Pokemon world, but its restoration would lead to the dinosaur rampaging across Kanto, requiring our protagonist crew to put a stop to it. This plot was ultimately shot down by the producers because they didn't think the idea would be profitable enough. And to be honest, I kind of think they're right. Like, the idea is sort of cool, but it feels completely out of left field compared to anything else produced by Pokemon at the time. So I understand why they chose to take it in a different direction. And the movie we did get is one of the most iconic in the entire series, so I think it was the right decision. The original dragon. If you've played the Unova games, you know exactly what this is referring to. Long ago, 2 two brothers founded the Unova region using a single powerful dragon-type Pokemon. But over time, the brothers grew apart, looking for different things in life. The older sought truth, and the younger sought ideals. And as they began to fight and drift apart, the single dragon split into two, Zekrom and Reshiram, leaving Kyurem as the leftovers. This single original dragon has been the subject of much theorization since the concept was first introduced to the series. Some people think it could have been a fourth member of the creation trio. Some people think it could have been one of the giants Arceus defeated, and some think it was just a really powerful dragon. This is one of those questions that I don't think will get answered unless we get a Legends Unova game. But if we do ever get one, I feel like it would have to focus on the original dragon. I mean, they already did Kyurem games, so what else would the focus be? The Swords of Justice? Genesect? That would be so much lamer. Moving on to level 6, we have Acid Rain. No, this doesn't refer to the real-world phenomena where pollutants carried in water fall on the planet, but instead to a glitch that existed in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Platinum. If a weather effect is up and you use Pursuit on a Pokemon that is switching out and it faints, this glitch will activate, and all 4 weather types will be active on the field until the end of battle. What's really wild about this glitch is that for whatever reason, it causes all 4 weather types to do chip damage, meaning your Pokemon are going to take like 25% of their HP every turn, unless they have a healing ability like Ice Body or Rain Dish, which will heal 4 times every turn instead, which is just wild. The effects of weather are also active and overlap, so moves like Thunder and Blizzard will ignore accuracy checks and Solar Beam will not have to charge. But because you're also using Solar Beam in the rain, it will also do reduced damage. And in case you're curious about how Cast Form reacts to this weather, it will just constantly change weather forms and softlock the game, forcing you to restart it. It's a pretty silly but still cool glitch that I'm sure plenty of people have not seen. E-Reader exclusives. The E-Reader was an accessory for the Game Boy Advanced and basically allowed the handheld to scan cards, which would unlock bonus content for whatever game was attached to it. Despite being popular in Japan, it never really caught on in North America, and as such there's a bunch of content that not many people got to see because it was discontinued so fast here. Some of the cooler exclusive content includes the Battle Series, which added like 40 trainer battles to the game, the Eon ticket used to access the other member of the Lati Duo, a card that made rare events more likely in Pokemon Pinball, and a bunch of exclusive berries. Most of these berries are only useful in Pokeblock making, but some of them do heal status conditions like normal berries, and the Janema berry basically acts as a white herb, which is kind of interesting. None of these berries are available outside of Ruby and Sapphire though, so unfortunately it's not like this is something that could be used in modern day Pokemon. Shiny Unknown IV. Shiny Unknown relates to the fact that only the I and V Unknown could be shiny in the Gen 2 games. This was because shininess was determined primarily by personality values at the time, and those same values were also what determined which Unknown you would get in an encounter. Because of how the two lined up, only I and V were able to be shiny in Gen 2. Just to be clear, it is a complete coincidence that it is the I and V Unknown specifically, but it's a pretty crazy coincidence if you think about it. Ghetsis is disabled. This theory basically stems from how Ghetsis acts with the right side of his body. He never seems to have the same control over it that he does over his left half, and we never really get to see any of it except for his right hand in one cutscene where it seems to be in pretty bad shape. Additionally, he uses a cane to walk in the sequels. We don't know exactly what caused this, but a lot of people think it could have been some incident with Hydreigon, as its Pokedex entry says that it perceives movement as a threat, meaning it's possible it lashed out against Ghetsis and permanently disfigured him. Other people thinks he might have had some sort of stroke, which affects his ability to control the right side of his body, and explains why he wears a monocle over his eye, as it kind of insinuates that it needs more help to function compared to his other side. Either way, I think it's pretty clear he has something going on, but it's interesting how well he hides it and how hard you have to look to see it. It kind of reminds me of FDR or Wilhelm II in a way. Sword and Shield are about oil. It doesn't take a genius to see that the focus of of the Galar games is an energy crisis. The Galar particle is a finite resource that has been imbued in the lands of Galar for thousands of years, but now they're running out, and it's going to start causing problems very soon. This could be a direct parallel to oil in our world, which is slowly but surely running out, although the issues from oil are already a lot more present in our world than they are in the world of Pokemon. Hilda and Hilbert are dead. If you played Black and White 2, you probably noticed the somewhat somber undertones that exist when characters are talking about the previous game's protagonists. Apparently, they haven't been home to their parents for quite some time, as they're looking for N. As it turns out though, N is also looking for them, as he hasn't seen them since the climax of the first games. He seems to mostly be waiting in his castle, which makes a lot of sense. In their shoes, I'd probably check the final place we saw each other fairly frequently, but it seems they haven't returned to the castle since whenever N got there. This absence has led some fans to believe that Hilda and Hilbert are dead, possibly killed by Getsis or another member of Team Plasma. Another possible theory though is that they've been sucked into another dimension or another time, as since Black and White 2 released, we have seen a number of characters get transported across time and space. Maybe they fell through an ultra wormhole and forgot who N was, or maybe Arceus sent them to the future, or maybe they just really suck at searching for N. And the final entry for Tier 6, Red was depressed. You ever accomplish something big in your life and then just feel empty? Graduating college, winning a large tournament, finishing a personal project? Just something that had been your focus for a while, and once you finished it, you kind of felt nothing. Well, what if Red felt this way as well? After all, he became the champion at a young age. He probably wasn't able to find Pokemon battlers that could contest with him after that, making him lose joy in battling. This could be why he climbed Mount Silver, perhaps in the hopes of finding new motivation, or perhaps to do something more nefarious. Obviously, there isn't much to back this theory up, it just aims to explain why he was at the top of Mount Silver. But if it is true, maybe that means our protagonist helped him out of his depression by proving that there are still strong trainers out there. Moving on to level 7, we're getting to the depths now. Ultra Beasts are people. Have you ever noticed how a number of Ultra Beasts just kind of look like people? Nihilego looks startlingly like Lily, with a very similar hat and hairstyle. Pheromosa looks a lot like Lusamine, both having similar hair, color palettes, and they even share a pose. Guzma is also super similar to Xurkitree. In fact, even beyond these direct similarities, a number of the Ultra Beasts seem to possess a human-like quality, with many of them being bipedal and holding some human-like proportions. Well, this is a similarity that Pokemon fans noticed way back when Sun and Moon were first being revealed as well, and they kind of went crazy with the theories at that time. They tried to draw connections between all of the Ultra Beasts and characters in the Alola region, even if a lot of them were stretches. Like, what do Gladion and Buzzswole have in common? Even to this day though, fans still see a deep connection between the Ultra Beasts and people, with a number of other fan theories cropping up over the years to explain the similarities. One of the more recent theories comes from the Amazed Dragon, who basically suggests that the worlds of the Ultra Beasts used to be inhabited by humans, but after Necrozma shattered in Ultra Megalopolis, its light forced them to undergo a transformation similar to Totem Pokemon, but much more severe, transforming them into Ultra Beasts. I think this is a bit far-fetched, but he goes really in-depth on the theory, so if you want to check it out yourself, I will leave a link to his video in the description. Volo delivered the 4 Treasures of Ruin. A major part of the lore of Scarlet and Violet's Treasures of Ruin is that the treasures were originally brought to the region by a merchant from the east. While this could technically mean any region that is geographically to the east of Paldea, this phrase could also mean the east as in Asia, more specifically China or the Pokemon equivalent. The reason people think it could be China is twofold. First of all, the 4 Treasures of Ruin bear a number of similarities to artifacts from Chinese history and mythology, bearing a surprising resemblance to Qin Dynasty era artifacts, including a Jian sword, Ding cauldron, jadeware, and bamboo slips. Additionally, the names of the Pokemon are obviously inspired by Mandarin grammar. The second reason is based on the real-world history of China and the Iberian Peninsula, as during the 16th century, both Portuguese and Spanish traders secured commercial trading rights in China when Macau was founded. But where does Volo come into this? Well, the Ginkgo Guild Guild gets its name from the ginkgo tree, a tree found primarily in China. So some people think a Ginkgo Guild member is the one that brought the treasures of ruin to Paldea, and as the most prominent and devious member, people of course point to Volo as being the one to do it. Why was Ange built? Throughout the whole of Legend ZA, we hear ominous warnings from AZ, who not so subtly implies that Ange, the living machine inside Prism Tower, was built to protect Lumiose. He says the building has been watching over Lumiose for generations, and that it was originally built to protect her. But protect her from what? What could he have known about that he felt was such a huge threat that he needed to build a doomsday device to dissuade it? Well, I think there are three main candidates he could have been worried about. First up, Yveltal. This one is pretty simple. The dude absorbs life energy until he's full. So if AZ built a machine that basically created infinite life energy, it could possibly satiate the beast without anyone needing to die. Another option is Necrozma, as it has the ability to appear anywhere it wants at any time to just feast on light, and Lumiose, being the city of light, could have become a target after it shattered. The biggest issue with Necrozma being a threat is that we don't have any evidence of AZ actually knowing it existed thousands of years ago when Ange was built, and the final reason was to protect the city from an invasion from another region. We know the original ultimate weapon was built to end the war that Kalos was stuck in, so perhaps he built Ange as a deterrent from another war, or just in case one started. Of these, I feel like the third option is probably the most realistic, but he's dead now, and I don't think we ever got an answer to this question. The Godstone. The Godstone sounds a lot more ominous and intriguing than it actually is. It's an unused key item in the Black and White games. It's heavily speculated that this was going to be Kyurem's equivalent of the Light or Dark Stone, perhaps to restore the original dragon or something similar. Obviously, it was never released or used, so despite having a really cool name, it is kind of useless. But surely when we get a Legends Unova game, which is definitely coming, we'll get some answers on this. Who sealed the Regis? One of the oldest mysteries in Pokemon is the identity of the people who sealed the Regi Trio and Regigigas. These are beings of immense strength, especially in the case of Regigigas, who literally helped shape the earth. Yet somehow, some ancient tribe was able to seal these giants away for thousands of years. Who were they, and how did they do this? Well, I think there are a few candidates we can look at for the who. The Draconids, the Celestica, and the Ginkgo Guild. These three groups exist deep into the past, with the Celestica and Draconid having direct ties to the legendaries of their respective regions. Of these, I think the Celestica are the most likely, because of their ties to the Sinnoh creation myth, which involves Regigigas, whereas the Draconid seem to only be connected to Rayquaza. Additionally, we know the Celestica eventually left Sinnoh for whatever reason, so it's possible some of them left and went to Hoenn, and then conducted the same process they used on Regigigas on those Regis as well. As for the Ginkgo Guild, they just seem like one of those organizations that appear a number of times throughout the history of Pokemon, especially if it was a guild member that gave the treasures of ruin to the King of Paldea like we just mentioned. Obviously, there is no evidence of any of these groups being the ones to seal the Regis, so this is just a fan theory at this point. And our final entry of level 7, Lavender Town Syndrome. Lavender Town Syndrome is probably the single entry I had the hardest time placing. It's one of the most well-known pieces of Pokemon history, meaning it should be towards the top, but it's also one of the darkest. Back when the original Red and Green came out, there was a sharp rise in children between the ages of 7 and 12 committing. While it wasn't clear what was causing this at first, investigators quickly learned that all of the children had recently reached Lavender Town in the games. See, in those games, the music of Lavender Town had unique high frequencies that only the ears of children could hear, and this frequency is what was making children as well as causing others to have headaches and act irrationally. At least, that's how the creepypasta goes. Yes, that's right, the whole event is not real. It's just an old story that got a ton of attention online when it was first created, because Lavender Town already has a creepy atmosphere and some pretty unsettling music. To be completely clear, this story is 100% made up. Level 8 is the bottom of the iceberg. From here we get into the truly obscure, and soon the truly bizarre. Pokemon Learning League. Back during the mid-2000s, the Pokemon Company set up a bizarre educational website known as the Pokemon Learning League. The site used a number of Pokemon characters to teach users about school subjects, such as science, math, language, and in some cases, even life skills. The site started out being free to use, but for whatever reason became subscription-based about 6 months after its launch in 2007. Unfortunately, the site was very short-lived, lasting for about 2 years before it was shut down. As such, it was considered to be lost media for a long time, because not many people had access to the site in the first place, and it was so short-lived that no one seemed to bother grabbing any archives. In fact, from 2009 until 2021, only 3 episodes had ever been found online, but in all 3 cases, they were heavily cut up and basically unreadable. However, on January 27, 2021, a user of the Lost Media Wiki, AmitCal, uploaded a version of the site to archive.org, and now you can go and view these old weird pieces of Pokemon history yourself. Space Nature Power. Space Nature Power is our final mechanics-based entry on the Iceberg, and it is really cool. Nature Power is an often overlooked move that changes to a different move depending on the terrain the user is standing on. For instance, if you use it while standing on grass, you will get Seed Bomb. If you use it while you're in a cave, you will get Rock Slide or Power Gem. But what if you use it in space? Well, space is actually considered its own terrain in Gen 6 during the Deoxys fight. And if you use Nature Power here, it will turn into Draco Meteor, which is so cool, not just because of the context of this fight, but also because they actually thought to put a Nature Power effect in the game for an environment that has one single battle. It's a nice little detail that I'm sure most people had no idea existed. And in case you're curious, yes, there is one for Ultra Space as well, and it is Psyshock. Unknown King. Unknown King is another one of those classic creepypastas that a lot of people love, but if I can be honest, as someone who is just hearing about it for the first time when researching this video, it sounds really dumb. It's basically about a person who gets a copy of Pokemon Silver delivered to their doorstep with a set of instructions left behind by the original owner, which they choose to follow. First, they have to complete the Pokedex. Luckily, the previous owner already has 248 Pokemon, so they just have to catch Ho-Oh, Lugia, and Celebi. Then they have to put together a specific team and wait until 3 a.m., at which point they have to go to the ruins of Alph and talk while using the unknown radio. This will sacrifice the Pokemon in the team one by one until it releases the Unknown King. And when this was done, their playtime was coincidentally at 666 hours, and they got a message saying they released the beast. After this, they have to wait for a phone call, and the player decides to wander through Johto, which is when they notice that all the NPCs are gone. The call comes from their mother and asks them to come home, but when they get there, it is also empty, except for a note that says they have to go and see Professor Oak. When they get to Oak's lab, he is not there, but the Unknown King is, and he kills the player. Oh yeah, and this whole time, the player's name was Jesus backwards. Finally, the player receives a message saying they've doomed humanity by releasing the Unknown King and thanking them for doing so. Yeah, it's pretty cheesy, but I guess that's kind of the point of a creepypasta, right? It's supposed to be a somewhat cheesy, spooky story, although I feel like this one is a little bit too unbelievable and isn't all that scary. Hoenn parents are divorcing. This one is pretty simple. There's a reason our dad is never home in the Hoenn region, and it's because they're getting divorced. This could also explain why we move at the beginning of the game, as the new house is just the mother's house, when before they lived together. Additionally, there's a bunch of dialogue that suggests Norman works too much and barely ever visits the house except to eat. To be honest, I don't know how much I want to believe in this theory. On one hand, it is kind of bizarre that only the Hoenn games have a family with 2 present parents, but on the other, I just don't think there's enough evidence to actually back this up. Relic Castle is ground zero is fairly self-explanatory. When you look at where the Relic Castle is on Manhattan, it is on the Lower West Side, very close to where the Twin Towers used to stand, which was called Ground Zero after the events of 9/11. Additionally, the Desert Resort only has 2 notable landmarks, 2 demolished towers, which are now the entrance to the ruins. Could this just be a coincidence? Yeah, it could, but considering how cognizant Pokemon has been of 9/11 in other contexts, like making it a Diamond Dust Day or making it one of the days that has a decreased encounter rate, I feel like they would probably be fairly aware of how this looked, you know? But hey, at least they put a dope-ass Pokemon in the basement though, right? Volcanion is a Paradox Pokemon. Has anyone else ever thought that Volcanion's design was just a bit weird? Like, it just looks bizarre even for a mythical Pokemon. Well, for a long time, the only possible explanation is that it was just a weirdly designed Pokemon, until Paradox Pokemon came along, specifically the future Paradox Pokemon, which all have some kind of mechanical integrations in their design, not unlike Volcanion's Steam-based integrations. So perhaps Volcanion is a Pokemon from a different time or a different universe entirely, and there are past and present variations of it that just haven't been revealed yet. Or maybe it just looks stupid because it looks stupid. X and Y are about aliens. Apparently, X and Y had a completely different plotline earlier into development that involved an alien invasion, at least according to a 4chan leaker. They suggest that the plot of X and Y underwent some huge changes late in development to stick to a more traditional Pokemon story. Originally, Team Flare was supposed to be a Men in Black-like organization, and they had the goal of hunting down AZ, who was actually an alien sent to Earth to destroy the planet. But he had a change of heart after meeting Floette. This sort of explains why AZ was able to make super advanced machines like the ultimate weapon, because in the original plot he was from a much more advanced civilization. The leak also claims that furry Pokemon actually played a much larger role in the plot originally, with them being mostly extraterrestrial Pokemon, specifically moon fairies. Sound familiar at all? A bunch of the characters were also supposed to be aliens as well, like Diantha and Valerie, the psychic type gym leader who I did always think had a bit of a bizarre design. In case you're curious if this leaker can actually be trusted, it is debatable. But I think there are a number of design and plot decisions made in X and Y that do suggest the plot was reworked at some point. Another interesting aspect of this is that a lot of the concepts from this supposed leak were used later in the Hoenn remakes and Alola games, despite this leak being posted before those games came out in 2014, which I think gives it a bit more credibility. Obviously, the alien invasion part was used for the Ultra Beasts in the Alola games, and making a squad of characters similar to the Men in Black was also used in the Ultra Recon squads. The alien plot was also sort of used in Oras with Deoxys in the Delta episode. Whether this is believable or just some troll is something you can determine for yourself. Personally, I think some of the details do line up, but some of them are definitely a stretch. A lot of the information for this theory was compiled by Diamond Goss on Medium in a really well-written entry, so I will leave a link in the description to that so you can check it out yourself if you want to. Level 9 and onward is almost entirely bizarre theories and unsettling pieces of lore within the Pokemon universe. True Arceus. Have you ever found it weird that a 10-year-old could just catch or defeat God? Like, as long as you have the Azure Flute, God will answer, and you can just catch him in a Pokeball like he's a Bidoof. Well, this theory basically states that what we catch isn't actually Arceus, but an avatar of the Pokemon. It is said that Arceus shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. What we see as Arceus could just be one of those arms, and that's why we can catch them. This is sort of corroborated by the concept art for Arceus that was leaked a while ago, where it looks far different and far more eldritch in appearance. Perhaps this is what Arceus truly looks like, and what we see is just how it wants to be perceived by us. There's also the possibility that the creation myth is wrong, and that Arceus isn't actually the creator of the universe, but just a really powerful Pokemon. That's a different theory entirely though, and we'll be talking about it in a second. The Dead Faller. During the Looker episode of Sun and Moon, we're introduced to Annabelle, a frontier brain from Hoenn, but not the Hoenn we know, the Hoenn of a parallel universe. Annabelle fell through an ultra wormhole and ended up in our universe, becoming the first faller to survive the trip, but not the first faller ever. There was one person who fell through an ultra wormhole before Annabelle who was killed by a Guzzlord, eaten in fact. Who was this person? Unfortunately, it was probably someone that we know, as every follower we meet is a character from another game. The character would have been someone who wasn't trained for battle, as the International Police used someone with no combat experience as bait. There's really no way for us to know who this person might be, but I have a few ideas. First, it could have been a Nurse Joy, as they are people who are deeply intimate with Pokemon but never engage in combat. Second could be Lycia, as she is another character who is named but is not a known battler. And third, it could just be someone unimportant. Regardless, this is one of the more gruesome cases of a Pokemon killing someone, and it was someone who is knowingly sacrificed as well, which makes it even worse. Arceus and the Giants. The power of defeated giants infuses this plate, is the inscription of the Flame Plate, one of the plates that relate to the Sinnoh creation myth and Arceus, and it is by far the most confusing plate of them all. Who are these giants? What kind of beings could oppose Arceus? Most people who theorize about this plate come to one of three conclusions: Eternatus, Necrozma, and the original dragon. Eternatus, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. The dude is massive, and in its Eternamax form, it is literally the biggest Pokemon to ever exist by a wide margin. Necrozma is also pretty big in the games, but it isn't anything crazy, just like 20 feet or so. But then you look at his interpretation in the anime, and good lord, is it enormous. And finally, for the original dragon, we don't know that much about it, but it is insinuated to be really strong, and the mystery around it has made a lot of people think it could be one of these giants. Another name that gets thrown around a lot is Zygarde, just because Zygarde Complete is so tall. But why would a being that values and supports order oppose a god? Well, perhaps that god wasn't always God. Perhaps, like Zeus or Marika, there was a god that preceded them, a god whose influence has been largely erased by the world to legitimize a new god. After all, if you were a god, wouldn't you want everyone to think you were unopposable? The Celestica and the Draconids are the same tribe. Pretty self-explanatory in my opinion. We know that the Celestica eventually left the Sinnoh region and went across the world, and considering their connection to the legends of Sinnoh, some people assume that they could be connected to the Draconids, who are connected to the legends of Hoenn, more specifically Rayquaza. But beyond this though, there isn't much of a connection, and I think most fans just see one because they're like the only two ancient groups that we know of that are named. The Abyssal Ruins Mystery. There are a lot of areas in Pokemon that create a sense of mystery and intrigue, but I'm not sure many have gone as overlooked as the Abyssal Ruins have. Maybe it's because of how annoying it is to traverse this place, or maybe it's because Gen 5 has been neglected by the Pokemon Company for so long, but I feel like this place still has a lot of unanswered questions. Here is what we do know though. The ruins were built 3,000 years ago within a larger city by one of the kings of Unova and his legendary dragon. At some point, a tsunami swept the entire city to the bottom of Undella Bay. Now, all that remains is the Abyssal Ruins. These ruins are where you can find all 17 plates, drawing a connection to Arceus, but they're also where you can find pretty much all the relic items. Most interesting though are some of the inscriptions on the walls, which are written in symbols that correspond to a cipher. Some of these are just helpful directions to guide the player, but a lot of the ones on the first floor specifically are dedicated to praising the king. The king is brave. The king is adventurous. The king accepts all. Go on, brave king, and so on and so on. The second floor is mostly a praise for life itself while denouncing barbaric actions like war. The third floor glazes the king again, but the fourth floor is where things get interesting, because even to this day, there are pieces of text that have not been deciphered, leaving a rather cryptic message. King defeats alone, joins king in a day. King called beings. King is hope and future. The Great King. Only the final symbol has its meaning known because it was found in Ghetsis' documents, and it is speculated to be Harmonia, the last name of Ghetsis and N. But the other three symbols are not known to us. I think the first and second could be names of Pokemon, but it's impossible to know for sure, so this stands as one of the remaining unsolved mysteries of the Unova region. I do also think it's interesting that the Abyssal Ruins were built 3,000 years ago. though, because that means they were built around the same time the ultimate weapon was fired and Eternatus awoke for the first time. What the hell was going on 3,000 years ago, man? I hope we get a Legends game set in that time period eventually, even if I don't know how likely that is. Tier 10. The final tier, the Marianas Trench of the Iceberg. Victini is a nuclear bomb. This theory comes directly from a Reddit post, but it kind of makes sense. At the very least, Victini is a reference to nuclear energy, as it is said to create infinite amounts of energy within its body. But it probably goes further than that. Victini is found in the Liberty Garden, an island based on the Liberty Island in New York City, which is not far from Manhattan Island. The project to create the first nuclear bomb was called the Manhattan Project. Its name is a combination of victory and tiny, which could be a reference to little boy. The smaller nuclear bomb dropped on Japan, which pretty much assured victory for the United States. Its hands are also in the shape of a V, which is very similar to the gesture used after victory in World War II. I think some of this is a bit of a stretch, but considering how many other references to nuclear weapons there are in Pokemon, I don't think it's impossible. Coughing in a Holocaust museum. Early in the life of Pokemon Go, the game received a pretty hefty controversy when a coughing spawned in a Holocaust museum in North America. This drew criticism of both Niantic for allowing a Pokestop to be in that kind of museum in the first place, and of the player for playing Pokemon Go in a Holocaust museum. At that point in the game, Pokestops could basically just be fan-submitted without much checking, just because of the sheer number of players that there were. So it's hard to say that there's really too much blame to be placed on Niantic here. Surely this company won't come into any other controversy over the years. The stop has since been removed, but it's still a pretty messed up incident in all regards. If it's even true, which some people think it's a complete hoax. Why is Team Rocket named Team Rocket? Have you ever actually thought about this? Pretty much every other Pokemon team has a name that closely references their goals or values. Team Aqua and Magma are self-explanatory. Team Galactic wants to control the Pokemon that control the universe. Team Plasma wants to control the Pokemon related to Plasma, and so on. But Team Rocket doesn't seem that interested in rockets at all. So why are they named Team Rocket? Well, in the manga, it's actually an acronym standing for Raid on the City, Knock Out Evil Tusk, which doesn't make much sense. The reason for this is because the acronym didn't translate well from Japanese to English. Originally, it was attack cities one after another, devastate them, we are the fangs of evil, which makes a lot more sense. But this acronym is ever only referenced in the manga, so it doesn't necessarily apply to the anime or games. I'm not entirely sure what their name is supposed to mean, and after looking into it online, it doesn't seem like there is a clear consensus. So please let me know why you think they're named Team Rocket in the comments down below. Pokemon with kill counts. There are a number of Pokemon that have canonically killed people in the Pokemon universe, and there are enough to make that a video itself. So instead of covering them all right now, I'm going to talk about some of my favorites, because some of them are kind of gruesome. We already talked about one a bit earlier, which is Guzzlord, who killed the Faller and realistically a lot more people as well, if the planet in the Ultra Games is supposed to be a destroyed Alola. Another one is Kyogre, who is implied to have killed both Archie and Shelly in this Pokemon Generations episode. We of course have Yveltal as well, who absorbs a shit ton of life energy anytime he needs to revive himself, killing those around him in the process. In fact, while we're talking about legendaries, pretty much every Paldea legendary has killed someone. Both of the bikes killed their professors, the Loyal 3 killed one of Ogerpon's companions, and the Ogre killed them as well. Another is Darkrai, whose one kill actually plays a part in Black and White 2, where we have to get a lunar wing to free her ghost from Darkrai's eternal torment. There are also a ton from the Pokemon manga, which I'm not very familiar with, but some of them just sound so raw that I want to mention them, like when Poliwhirl froze and shattered a Graveler, or when Dragonair nuked a city. It seems really intense, and it's kind of surprising overall just how many people have died in this otherwise lighthearted series. Interspecies relations. No, we're not talking about inter-Pokemon relations, we're talking about, people and Pokemon. Over the course of Pokemon, there have been a number of people and books that talk about how Pokemon and people have coexisted. It's actually kind of interesting. A lot of the accounts of people and Pokemon being married or being together in a romantic sense come from ancient times, where people and Pokemon were considered the same, so that was the norm. This information comes from a book in the Canalave Library, and there's even a hiker in the library who elaborates on this, as he says that people and Pokemon have the same spirit, and that in many cases they took the place of one another, which is why they married at the time. Obviously, by the standards of the Pokemon world today, this would probably be seen as weird or unorthodox, but it's always fascinating to me how the customs of ancient peoples can look so outlandish to us now, when they were the norm back then. With that being said, the interspecies relationships didn't really stop. There are a number of people and a number of Pokemon that have shown explicit attraction for each other. For example, there's this old lady in Colosseum who says that her Mightyena is her boyfriend. There's also Frostlass, who is said to freeze hikers that are climbing snowy mountains and take them back to the Pokemon's home, but the Frostlass will only do that if they find the men attractive. There's also apparently a Machamp who is dating a woman in one of the game's demos, but I couldn't find any footage of it. When we look at the anime though, this roster expands quite a bit, with a number of Pokemon showing romantic interest in people, like Latias in the 5th movie, Meowth and Cassandra, and many more. Sometimes it's just wild to think about what they put in these games, you know? And our final entry on the Iceberg is to make God. This is my personal favorite theory that we've talked about today. Over the past 4 generations, Pokemon has introduced a number of unique and powerful third legendaries that exist in close relation to their main duo. For Xerneas and Yveltal, that's Zygarde. For Solgaleo and Lunala, that's Necrozma. For Zacian and Zamazenta, there's Eternatus. And for Koraidon and Miraidon, there's Terapagos. What's really interesting about these 4 is they actually share a relationship to God, or rather the alchemical process to create God. This process dates back to the Dark Ages and requires 4 ingredients: light, chemical, reflection, and life. These 4 attributes line up almost perfectly with the 4 legendaries introduced, with the only slight misalignment being Zygarde and life. But considering he exists to balance out a being that creates infinite life and one that devours infinite life, I don't think it's too big of a stretch to say that Zygarde represents life in some way. The real kicker is that the god made from these 4 ingredients is known as Arceus. Kinda crazy, right? Now, what does this actually mean? I don't know. Maybe it means the Pokemon Company is planning an Avengers-level crossover where Volo tries to create a new Arceus. Or maybe it means nothing at all, and this is just an Easter egg or source of inspiration with no further depth. But it's definitely interesting to think about, especially in the context of the Giants plate we covered earlier, as 3 of the 4 Pokemon we talked about could qualify as those giants. Regardless, this is one of my favorite patterns or coincidences in Pokemon, so I wanted to highlight it. And that's the Iceberg. Sorry if there are any theories or ideas you wanted included that weren't. I tried to avoid some of the more well-known ones to give this Iceberg a bit of uniqueness. If you guys really liked this and want more Icebergs, please let me know, and I definitely won't rule it out. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end as always, and I'll see you next week for another video.